Hi everyone, I've added a whole bunch of new Blender files relating to my personal animated project onto my Patreon, but we're going to take a look at them as well, so you don't have to be on the Patreon to get value out of it. But before we look at those files, just going to give you a quick reminder that I've been setting up my own private mailing list system. So if you want to be updated for future projects, products, resources, you can sign up at codisholt.online/store. It's not essential, not important. Let's take a look at the files. A huge new file has been added to the May production files on Patreon. This one is the 2026-0503 compound plan.zip. So it's a zip file this time rather than just a blend file because there's a lot of different layers to it. So as you can probably see, this starts introducing terrain. There is a location that's quite important to the story of the project. Again, I know I'm keeping things vague, but this is my first attempt at using Gaia. I have a commercial use version so I can distribute this, but it merges in some of the earlier office work with this kind of master environment plan, and you can see just the scale of the environment, simulating time of day with the multiple scattering, so you can take a look inside the blend file, which I'll show you in a sec, and see what kind of choices have been made. Now, naturally, because this is, a massively in progress thing, a lot of it is just pure block out, but that's because with the way I work, I like to jump around lots of different stylistic areas. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of user interface stuff soon as well, and chip away and see what's kind of visually possible, like a chaotic storyboarding, and then, string the ideas together afterwards. So it kind of gives me an idea of where to actually invest time refining things later on, rather than just blocking something out and then spending days trying to make it realistic. Instead, just doing surface level style tests, putting them all up on a board, and then deciding, okay, this one, that's what I'm going to focus on. So in that zip file, you will find the blend file, which is about 2.5 gigabytes at the time of this video. Now that's large because it contains the terrain data and the texture data for the terrain. They're about 8K maps. Now it looks like a large file size, but really, for a production file, that's not too bad. Inside of the terrain folder, you will see the Gaia related files and the texture files as well. So, you can have a little look at those, modify them. You can use these production files for personal work, but if you do that, you have to provide credit. There's a note about that on the actual Members Lounge page. In the actual file, if I just zoom out here, so we have a block out for the environment, we have the terrain, and then we've got some atmospherics. The atmospherics come in the form of a bounding volume, which has a slight gradient on the kind of density of the atmosphere, as you can see. So I've calibrated that in the way I'd like it. I've done all sorts of modifications to the terrain material, combining textures in weird ways to get a style that I visually quite like, with a bit of roughness along the peaks. This is supposed to be set in New Mexico, but I'm taking creative liberties just to kind of get like a visual style that I want that's, somewhat appropriate, but still a little bit creative. The collections are a little bit difficult to, navigate, but under the cameras collection here, let's take a look at some of the views. So we've got a lot of block out views, you can see, but we can see the terrain in the background and the block out, and in the world nodes down here in the bottom, we can adjust like the sun elevation for the time of day. Naturally, terrain close up is not detailed again, block out, etc. We can do a lot of like micro details later on. You can also do the sun rotation as well, which is nice for kind of figuring out like shadow placements. Next, camera position. You see a lot of these buildings haven't even had any work done on them, but I'm still like kind of getting positions ready for potential shots when things are to a more realistic level. So this is just planning ahead, car park, etc. So some of the shots are more kind of architectural focused, but some are more terrain focused. See here. So we've got one camera here where I'm kind of zoomed in on the horizon to see what it looks like detail wise, but also this is a good one for like a little sunset test. You see there? So I put a little image of that up on the Patreon post. So this is what I might call like a calibration shot in a way. It's where you can look at the visual in different states and then, make some adjustments to the material and go, actually, maybe that looks better for like, a full midday look, and maybe that looks better under that lighting, etc. There's not like a really good order to the camera layouts. You just got to flick through them and gain an understanding of what they're for by playing with them. I do quite like this angle, especially with the little atmospheric haze. I should probably have a go at doing some heat stuff at some point. So further away terrain. Again, here you can kind of see close up the pixel limit, but again, that's something to work on when going back to it in the future for like finer detail. Another one of the same. Then we got inside the office building. Now, what's interesting? That I have my lighting product Afterglow, the emissive lighting one. Everyone's running different rigs, right? I'm using a 3090 computer. I think it's 64 gigabytes of RAM. I need to double check that. And an AMD CPU. Now, one question I get a lot about that is, isn't emissive lighting slow? I mean, yeah, but you can see it's usable. I've got pretty much freaking every single kind of emissive light going in here and reflecting off of everything inside of an atmospheric volume haze, inside of a multi-layered 8K terrain. And I can still look around, get my renders, get my shots. I mean, in the end, I'll be like render farming this when it comes to it. So you can see here that the office test environment has been merged into the master environment. But what that really means is if I go down to the office structure collection, go to desk scene, camera window focus, it means that we can now see perspective in context. So we can see like the background mountain range there and look around as if we're actually in the place. You see? Now, this is just a plane, by the way, representing where a computer may be for presenting information if I wanted to kind of simulate this view. And this is actually related to another file, which I'll be putting up on the Patreon. And if you're watching this in a comp video on YouTube, that may already be available. We may talk about that afterwards. But basically, you might find this file interesting because it's showing how I'm compounding everything together and then working in kind of detail layers over time. Something I like doing as well is like zooming out and looking at the whole terrain because, I mean, it's such a nice looking terrain, especially from a distance. And it's kind of cool playing with the time of day while doing this as well. So yeah, like I said, this is available for the $5 tier patrons and above. Just go to codasol.online/members, go to the production files section. Then on the May production files post for Project Fold, you'll find this one on there. But again, it's like a 2 and a bit gigabyte zip file. So you just be aware of that. This will be difficult to run on, less capable devices. If you do have trouble like, accessing it, running it, starting the render, etc., I apologize. But again, it's a production file, so that should be expected. All right, the next file added to the Patreon is the updated digital screen test. This is where I'm building a virtual operating system of sorts that's related to the story. So there's a lot of tests related to emissive UI elements, presentation of certain objects, the ultra contrast lighting because of the negative lighting coming from underneath, which sucks out some of the light from things being presented. There's different UI states involved in this. So again, this will be available as a zip file on the May production files. And within that zip file, not only will there be the blend file, which is called 2026-0502 screen style test free, but there's a UI elements folder which contains some of the UI pieces, which are the emissive elements, as well as the original affinity files that I've used to make these. Now, I won't break these down specifically. They may be a bit complicated if you look into them, but the reason why I'm including this is because, hey, if you're signing up as my patrons, you should be able to get access to everything, with the exception of specific lore-related elements, because, spoilers. But giving you the access to these files does mean that you're kind of now getting into contact with that stuff anyway. So I'm having to acknowledge that I'm giving you access to things that maybe I don't really want you to see. So just for the sake of being like respectful, if you find things that are like very specifically like weird and story related, just try and keep it to yourself. Like I'll give you access to this stuff and then you will respectfully, keep it private. And I think that'll be a nice dynamic. So let's take a look at how this file has developed, because earlier versions of the UI stuff were very like simple. Now we've got much more comprehensive UI things going on. What you'll find in the collection list on the right is we've got the basic transmissive wall/screen. So this is the glass effect with the roughness and the lighting. And you'll find a series of collections that start with UI state. So UI state is basically like a major category for the UI. It changes the whole interface. So in the case here, UI state login, this is like a login screen, obviously. UI state loading, ingesting data, it's a loading screen. UI state identity verification. So it's just simple. The right side isn't needed. We've got like some selectable options here. But as this is the design of the operating system I'm going for, some things are consistent. So we've got this side panel here indicating that we're on the verification level. But let's say I wanted to go to the intranet, then I would swap to the intranet state and we'll see that the intranet is now highlighted. Now this is not complete, but this is again just like testing UI elements and seeing what works and what would be visually interesting, or how can I compress data into this, etc. Now ideally, all of these UI elements should be individual so they can be moved around. However, again, as I'm like blocking out and testing, a lot of these are actually just like combined images from Affinity. So they're not split and they're not separate, which makes it a bit inconvenient for prototyping different styles, but it is convenient from the perspective of working in Affinity and just importing it all in one go. If I did want to make it more individual and modular in the future, so you get like modular, UI styles like this, then that is totally doable. But just like when looking at the whole, terrain map that we talked about, I don't really see a point in going all out 100% full effort into detail unless I know I really need it. However, one thing that I think you might appreciate is that whenever there is like an imported image or even the text, in the shader editor, I've created a node group called common UI color, and it has basically like a hard-coded RGB value, which means it's easy to recolor the interface. So I think anyone that wants to adopt this technique and this visual style for themselves might appreciate something like that, because again, it gives you the option to like rapidly prototype things. You'll see here that I've also been doing UI elements for like pointing to things or like brackets, and I find it interesting that the negative light, the area light underneath here, which is set to a negative value, which basically sucks light out of the stuff it's hitting, also applies to the UI elements, which was not intentional, but I find that quite interesting still. Now, there are lots of other states of the UI that I want to do, so there's still quite a lot of work to do there. And, there's a couple of intentions for doing this kind of project. One is information presentation is going to be really important for me. In fact, there may be entire shorts that are just based entirely on this kind of screen that don't require anything else, just for the sake of presenting like lore information or puzzles. You may not know, but I've been quite heavily involved with alternate reality games in the past. We're talking about like the 2018 period. So I've got a lot of experience in like puzzle crafting. I'm noticing that this is out of place. That's fine. Don't worry about it. So I've picked up on a lot of like interesting techniques while working on this for presenting data. So I'm going to keep pushing it. However, rendering this as is one thing, but this could also be rendered out and then put onto a screen in a different environment, which then makes it diegetic. So in a way, you've got like a double layer thing going on. We can see that here, for example. So I could render out the activity happening in the operating system in this file where we've got access to everything. And yes, I will need to animate the text. So I need to get invested in geometry nodes like to do that, which is fine. So we can use this as a staging file for all of the kind of user interface and operating system type stuff to output that video data and then recycle it to be reused in a different environment. So then we can record it diegetically. That's just another option. Now, again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you would have seen that I've included the like compound and terrain file already. We would have talked about that. And you would have seen a plane put in there, which is basically a reminder to myself to say, oh yeah, we can diegetically use that. Now, everything is also packed into the blend files. So all the UI elements are included and they're packed. You can see that as indicated by the icon, which means you technically don't need the extra files that I put in the zip file for you, but I've packed it because, I want you to be able to see what I have on my screen. You think, wow, this is really cool. This looks great. I want to play around. I want to experiment. I want to change the text and do my own things. You can do that. That's why it's packed. So again, I'll keep developing this into the future as I continue working on the project. And all of this will be available to you on the May 2026 Project Fold production files for $5 tier patrons and above. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.